Mafia boss found his receptionist with a broken arm. He is shocked. Callum Wren, a man who had built 39 years of his life on the principle that nothing surprises you twice, walked into a building he owned, but nobody knew he owned, dressed like nobody, expecting nothing he hadn't already seen before. What he found was a young woman hiding a broken arm under a reception desk and smiling like everything was perfectly fine. She wasn't performing bravery, she was surviving. And that single moment dismantled something in him that 2 decades of ruthless living had never once come close to touching. Right now, and ring that notification bell. What happens next will stay with you. Now let's get into it. Aldgate House didn't look like the kind of building that hid anything. 12 floors of glass and polished steel rising clean against a gray morning sky. Lobby fresh with the smell of floor wax and expensive coffee. Tenants moving through the revolving doors with the purposeful energy of people who believed they were building something. It looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like. Legitimate, professional, unremarkable. That was precisely why Callum had bought it. He came through the revolving door at 8:40 in the morning, wearing a dark jacket that had seen better years, plain trousers, and the kind of forgettable face that a man of his particular discipline could assemble when the situation required it. No watch, no driver, no shadow of the infrastructure that normally moved around him like weather. Just a man with a visitor's reason and nowhere specific to be, which was the most dangerous configuration Callum Wren ever assumed. His financial team had flagged Aldgate House 3 days ago. Expense irregularities. Small enough to be accidental, consistent enough to be intentional. Somebody in that building was helping themselves to money that didn't belong to them, and they had been doing it with the quiet confidence of someone who believed they were invisible. Callum had properties across the city managed through layers of holding companies and shell entities, deliberately designed to keep his name off the paperwork. He rarely visited any of them personally, but something about the pattern in these particular numbers had bothered him in a way he couldn't fully articulate. And Callum had learned over 39 years to pay close attention to the things that bothered him without explanation. So he came himself. No announcement, no advance notice. Just Callum Wren walking into a building he owned, the same way a stranger would. The lobby was mid-morning busy. Not crowded, but alive. A coffee counter to the left with a short queue. A security desk to the right, staffed by a guard scrolling his phone with the discreet inattention of someone who had decided the morning held nothing worth watching. And directly ahead, behind a long, white reception counter that caught the light from the atrium windows, a young woman was working. Callum's trained eyes swept her the same way it swept every room he entered. Fast, complete, cataloging before the conscious mind had finished forming questions. Mid-20s. Dark hair pulled back with the practicality of someone who dressed for function before appearance. A professional composure that sat naturally on her face, not performed. She was handling the desk with her left hand. Mouse, keyboard, phone receiver. All of it managed with a fluency that seemed almost deliberate in how exclusively left-handed it was. Her right arm was below the counter. He walked toward her at the pace of someone with a reason to be there and no reason to rush. She looked up as he approached and gave him the standard professional greeting. Measured, pleasant, completely neutral. Her eyes were dark and steady, and carried the particular exhaustion of someone running on less than they needed for longer than they should have been. He told her he had a meeting on the 9th floor, a name he had memorized from the tenant directory, a consulting firm that occupied a suite up there and would have no record of any appointment with him, but that was fine. He wasn't going to the 9th floor. She processed his visitor badge with her left hand. Efficient. Quick. Her right arm remained below the counter throughout, not resting, not relaxed, but held. The way you hold something that hurts when it moves. He took the badge. He didn't leave. He asked her something inconsequential about the building. How long had she worked there? Was the coffee any good? The kind of small talk that gives a man with his particular set of skills an excuse to stay in one place and observe without appearing to observe. She answered with the practiced brevity of someone who had learned to close conversations quickly, which told him something too. Then the elevator opened. The man who stepped out was mid-40s, heavy-set, wearing a suit that was expensive in the way that insecure men buy expensive things. Loudly, as a statement. He crossed the lobby with the swagger of someone who had decided long ago that every room he entered existed primarily for his benefit. His eyes moved to the reception desk, the way a hand moves to check a possession is still where it was left. Nora's body changed. It was subtle, the kind of thing that only registers if you are watching with the right quality of attention. Her shoulders drew in a fraction. Her chin dropped a degree. The natural steadiness in her face reorganized itself into something more careful, more managed, more defended. She didn't look at the man directly. She looked at her screen with the focused intensity of someone who has learned that invisibility is a skill worth developing. The man, Callum would confirm the name within the hour, Ferris Galt, operations director, the person whose expense accounts had generated the irregularities that brought Callum here in the first place, walked past the reception desk without acknowledging Nora and disappeared into the back corridor. Nora's shoulders dropped, not in relief. In the particular way that a body releases tension it has been holding so long it has forgotten what the absence of it feels like. Callum picked up his visitor badge. He thanked her. He walked to the elevator, rode it to the 4th floor, walked the length of it seeing nothing he needed to see, and came back down via the stairwell. He exited through the side door onto the street and stood in the cold morning air for a moment, with his hands in his jacket pockets. The expense irregularities could wait. He pulled out his phone and called his head of security, a former intelligence operative named Breck, who had worked exclusively for Callum for 11 years, and had never once asked a question he wasn't supposed to ask. "I need the complete security archive for Aldgate House," Callum said. "Everything. Last 30 days, every camera, every floor." He paused. "And I need a full background on a woman named Nora Bale. She's on the front desk." Another pause, shorter. "Tonight, Breck. I need it tonight." He ended the call and looked back at the building's glass facade, at the lobby visible through it, at the white reception counter, at the young woman behind it, already back to doing her job with her left hand, while her right arm stayed carefully, painfully, out of sight. He stood there a moment longer than he needed to. Then he walked. The footage ran for 4 hours before Callum stopped it. Not because he had seen enough, because he needed a moment to sit with what he had seen, before he could continue watching it. He was in his private office on the top floor of his actual building across the city, the one with his real name on the lease, and his real infrastructure humming around it. And the room felt different than it usually did. Smaller somehow. The way rooms get smaller when something large and ugly has been let into them. Breck had delivered everything by 9 that evening. 32 days of archived security footage from every camera in Aldgate House, cross-referenced with the employee access logs and the building's internal scheduling system. Organized, indexed, ready. Breck was efficient in the way that only people who understood the cost of inefficiency ever truly became. Callum had started at the beginning and worked forward. The pattern announced itself within the first week of footage. Ferris Galt, operations director, 12-year employee, the man whose expense accounts had first flagged the irregularities, moved through the building with the ease of someone who had never once been held accountable for anything. He was loud in the corridors, expansive in meetings, the kind of man who filled space aggressively, who spoke over people as a habit rather than an oversight, who had arranged the social architecture of his professional environment so that everyone around him operated at a slight but constant disadvantage. And Nora Bale was at the center of it. Callum watched Galt cross the lobby every morning and register her presence at the reception desk, the same way a man registers a belonging. A quick proprietary glance, confirming she was where she was supposed to be. He watched Galt stop at her desk on trivial pretexts, a package to be signed for, a visitor to be announced, that had nothing to do with operational necessity and everything to do with reminding her of his proximity. He watched Nora receive each of these intrusions with the same carefully managed neutrality, the same practiced smile, the same eyes that found somewhere else to be while her face did what it needed to do. Then he found the office summoning pattern. Galt called Nora to his 5th-floor office an average of twice a week, always in the late afternoon, always after the administrative floor had thinned to skeleton staff. The elevator footage showed her going up, straight-backed, composed, carrying herself with a dignity that Callum recognized as the hard-won kind, the kind that costs something to maintain. The same footage showed her coming back down. She never looked the same on the return journey. Something had been taken each time, consistently, systematically, in amounts small enough to be deniable and large enough to accumulate into devastation. The broken arm appeared in the footage 11 days ago. She arrived that morning moving differently, carefully, with the deliberate economy of someone navigating serious pain. Her right arm was wrapped beneath her sleeve in what the camera couldn't fully resolve, but Callum recognized from the shape of it as a makeshift splint. She sat behind her desk, and she worked her full shift, and she smiled at every person who approached that counter, and she never once mentioned it to anyone. No incident report was filed. Callum had checked the building's HR records twice to confirm. He closed the footage at 1 in the morning and opened Breck's background file on Nora Bale, 26 years old, community college graduate working toward a bachelor's degree through an online program, 2 courses per semester around her full-time hours. Studio apartment in a neighborhood that required careful budgeting to maintain. No family in the city. Her mother had passed 4 years ago. Father absent since childhood. She had one listed emergency contact, a younger sister named Iris, 19, residing in a different state. Callum read the financial summary. Every dollar Nora earned was accounted for in the way that only people operating without a safety net account for money. Rent, utilities, groceries, tuition installments, a small automatic transfer to a savings account that had been paused 3 months ago. The pause date landed in the same week that the first camera footage showed a visible shift in Nora's comportment at work. The week she had stopped looking at the elevator doors with routine attention and started watching them the way prey watches the tree line. He called Breck. "The sister," Callum said without preamble. "Iris Bale. I need everything." Breck called back 40 minutes later. His voice carried the particular flatness of someone delivering information they wish they weren't delivering. 6 months ago, she got picked up by a mid-level distribution outfit operating out of the warehouse district. Started small, running packages between locations, nothing she understood the full weight of. Then they pushed her into heavier work. She tried to back out 2 months in. They held the original involvement over her. Threatened exposure, criminal charges. Worse. Callum was very still. And Galt found out somehow. Could have been an overheard call. Could have been he was already watching her closely enough to notice she was stressed about something outside work and dug into it. Either way, he knew within a week of Iris trying to back out. Breck paused. He paid the outfit to release her. Full settlement, clean exit. The kind of resolution that requires either serious money or serious connections. Galt had access to building operating funds through his expense authority. The payment came from 3 separate petty cash accounts over 2 weeks, small enough individually to pass a routine audit. He used embezzled money to buy her sister's freedom, Callum said, and handed Nora the invoice. The silence that followed had weight to it. Callum stood and walked to his window. The city spread out below him, indifferent and blazing, entirely unaware that somewhere in a studio apartment, in a neighborhood that required careful budgeting, a young woman was lying awake, with a broken arm she couldn't afford to have treated, doing the math on a debt she had no means of escaping, protecting a sister who had no idea what the protection was costing. "The outfit that had Iris," Callum said. "Who runs it?" Breck told him. "I know them," Callum said. It was a simple statement of fact. In his world, knowing someone covered a range of relationships, from cautious alliance to active antagonism. In this case, it meant something more useful. It meant he had leverage they couldn't afford to ignore. "I'll make a call tomorrow morning. Iris Bale is to be completely and permanently extracted from any association with that operation. No residual threat, no ongoing claim, no future contact. Clean. They'll want something in return. They'll want whatever I decide they want," Callum said, with the particular quiet that people who had worked with him long enough understood was not calmness, but its opposite, compressed into a single register. "Set it up." He ended the call and remained at the window for a long time. Galt had been stealing from Aldgate House for years, the original irregularity that had brought Callum there. He had used that stolen money to manufacture leverage over a vulnerable employee. He had then spent months systematically dismantling that employee's sense of safety, her physical well-being, her ability to ask anyone for help. He had built a small, private architecture of cruelty inside a building that Callum owned and funded, and had never once thought to look inside carefully enough to see what was being constructed there. That last part sat with Callum in a way that was not comfortable and was not meant to be. He returned to his desk. He opened the footage again and found the timestamp from Nora's first morning after the broken arm appeared. He watched her sit down behind the reception counter, adjust her posture carefully around the pane, set her left hand on the keyboard, and begin her day. She worked for 11 hours that day without complaint, without a single visible crack. She wasn't performing bravery. She was surviving. Callum closed the laptop and made one more decision before he slept. Tomorrow morning, he would go back to Aldgate House. Same jacket, same forgettable face, same nobody with nowhere specific to be. But this time, he wasn't going to just watch. This time, he was going to find a way to make Nora Bale trust a stranger. And that, he understood, was going to be considerably harder than anything else he had done this week. Earning trust from someone who had been systematically taught that trust was a liability was not a fast process. Callum understood that going in. He had spent his entire adult life reading people, understanding what they needed, what they feared, what they would and wouldn't respond to. And everything he had learned about Nora Bale told him that pressure of any kind, however well-intentioned, would close her down completely. She had built her survival around a single operating principle: give nothing away. It had kept her functional under conditions that would have broken most people. He wasn't going to dismantle it with urgency, so he came back to Aldgate House the same way he had come every morning that week. Same jacket, same visitor's pretext, same seat in the lobby coffee shop with a black coffee and a clear sight line to the reception desk. He had become, over the course of 4 days, part of the building's ambient furniture. The quiet man with the forgettable face, who was always waiting for a meeting that never quite seemed to happen. The barista had stopped asking for his order. The security guard had stopped clocking him. Even Nora had settled into a pattern of acknowledging him with the brief professional nod reserved for regulars. That was what he needed. Familiarity without pressure. Presence without demand. On the 5th morning, he timed it carefully. Waited until the lobby had thinned to its mid-morning quiet, until the coffee queue had dissolved and the security guard had rotated to his break, until Nora was alone at the counter, with nothing immediately pressing on her attention. Then he walked over with his cup and stood at a natural conversational distance and said something completely inconsequential about the coffee. She responded, briefly, cautiously, but she responded. He didn't push further. He finished his coffee and went back to his seat. The following morning he did the same thing, a different inconsequential observation, a shorter exchange. He was not trying to get information from her, not yet, not directly. He was simply establishing that he was a person who spoke to her like a person, which he had gathered from watching was rarer in her daily experience than it should have been. By the 3rd exchange, something had shifted almost imperceptibly in the way she looked at him. The professional neutrality was still there. She wasn't going to abandon that easily, and he didn't expect her to. But underneath it was a very careful, very tentative recalibration. He wasn't a threat. He wasn't Galt. He wasn't anyone she needed to manage or endure or perform for. He was just a man who asked how her morning was and appeared to mean it. On the 8th day, Galt came down to the lobby at 11 in the morning in a mood that announced itself ahead of him. Callum was in his usual seat and watched the entire thing with a stillness that required genuine discipline to maintain. Galt planted himself at Nora's desk over a filing error so minor it barely qualified as an error at all, and proceeded to conduct a public humiliation with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it for long enough that it no longer required any conscious effort. His voice stayed low. He was too smart to shout in a public space. But the tone carried, and the intent was unmistakable. Other people in the lobby found their phones suddenly fascinating. The barista developed an urgent need to reorganize the pastry display. Nora took it without flinching, without tears, without a single visible crack in the surface she presented to the world. She apologized in exactly the right register, not groveling, which would have satisfied Galt too quickly, but sufficiently contrite to give him what he needed to end the performance on his own terms. He left. She sat back down. She opened her keyboard and resumed working within 15 seconds. Callum got up and walked to her desk. He didn't say anything about what had just happened. He didn't ask if she was okay. He could see she wasn't, and she knew he could see it. And asking would have forced her to lie to him, which would have closed the door he had spent 8 days quietly propping open. Instead, he set his empty coffee cup on the counter and said he had noticed the coffee shop had run out of the dark roast, and did she know if they restocked it in the afternoon. Nora looked at him for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. The first genuine, unmanaged expression he had seen on her face. They restock it too, she said, but the dark roast is never as good in the afternoon. The morning batch is better. Good to know, Callum said. He picked up his cup. Thank you, Nora. He went back to his seat. That afternoon at 10 minutes past 2, he brought her a coffee from the counter. Dark roast. He set it at the edge of her desk without ceremony and didn't linger, because the gesture needed to be small enough that she could accept it without feeling obligated. She looked at it for a moment after he walked away. Then she wrapped both hands around the cup, her left hand and her right, and the small involuntary wince that crossed her face when the right hand closed around the warm ceramic told him more than any file Breck could have compiled. The next morning, he asked if he could sit for a moment. She gestured to the small waiting area chair nearest her desk. Technically for visitors, technically appropriate, just close enough for a quiet conversation. He sat. He told her he had noticed she was always careful with her right side. He said it simply and without drama. The way you mention something that is plainly visible and doesn't require any pretense of invisibility. He said he wasn't asking for an explanation. He was asking if she had seen a doctor. She said she was fine. He said he didn't think she was. The silence that followed was long enough that he thought she was going to close down entirely, retreat behind the professional mask, and give him the polite dismissal she had perfected over months of practice. But she didn't. She looked at her desk, her left hand pressed flat against the surface. When she spoke, her voice was very quiet and very level, and it cost her something to produce it. I can't see a doctor, she said. Why not? Another silence, longer this time. Because if I do, there are questions. And if there are questions, there are reports. And if there are reports, she stopped herself. Something happens to someone you're protecting, Callum said quietly. She looked at him sharply, not with anger, with the raw, exposed expression of someone who has just heard a truth spoken aloud that they have been carefully keeping internal for a very long time. I don't know who you are, she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. You've been coming here every day for over a week, and you're always waiting for a meeting that never happens, and you always end up talking to me, and I don't. She stopped. I don't know what you want. Right now, Callum said, I want you to know that whatever is holding you in this situation, it may not be as permanent as you think it is. You don't know anything about my situation. No, he agreed. But I'd like to if you'll let me. She looked at him for a long time. The lobby moved around them, people coming and going, the ordinary texture of a working building's morning. And in the middle of it, Nora Bale sat behind her reception desk and made a calculation that Callum understood was costing her more than it appeared to cost. There's a person, she said finally, someone I need to keep safe. And the only way I can do that is by staying quiet. And staying here, Callum said. Yes. Even when it does this to you. He didn't gesture at her arm. He didn't need to. She looked at the desk. She's all I have left. Callum nodded slowly. He didn't tell her what he already knew about Iris. He didn't tell her that 2 days ago he had made a call that had quietly and permanently removed the threat hanging over her sister's head. That Iris Bale was already free, already safe, already living a life that no longer had anything dangerous attached to it, and that she didn't know it yet, because Callum had wanted Nora to hear it from him that would raise more questions than it answered. He wasn't ready to tell her that yet, because telling her that meant telling her everything, and telling her everything meant this quiet building, with its morning coffee and its careful conversations, was about to change, irrevocably. He stood from the chair. "Thank you for talking to me," he said. Nora looked up at him with an expression that contained something he hadn't seen there before. Not trust, not yet, not fully, but the very earliest condition of it. The recognition that a person had been given the opportunity to take something from her and had chosen not to. "Same time tomorrow?" she said. It was almost dry, almost wry, the ghost of a person who had a sense of humor buried underneath everything that had been piled on top of it. "Same time tomorrow," Callum confirmed. He was almost at the revolving door when he heard it, a sharp sound from behind him, the particular sound of a confrontation that had moved past words. He turned. Galt was at the reception desk. He had come back down, unusual for this time of day, unscheduled, which meant something had shifted in his calculus about Nora. He was leaning across the counter and his voice was low, and his posture was the posture of a man reminding someone of something they were not supposed to forget. Nora had gone very still, in the way that prey goes still when flight is not an option. Callum was back across the lobby in 12 seconds. He didn't announce himself. He simply arrived at the reception desk and stood beside Nora with the particular quality of stillness that people who had spent time around him learned very quickly to pay attention to. He looked at Galt with the expression of a man who has decided something and is simply waiting for the formality of the situation to catch up with the decision. Galt looked at him, looked at Nora, looked back at Callum. Something in what he saw made him straighten up. "Can I help you?" he said with the automatic authority of a man used to being the most dangerous person in any given room. "No," Callum said simply. "You can't." The word landed in the space between them with a weight that Galt clearly felt but couldn't source. He didn't know this man, couldn't place him, couldn't read him. And men like Galt, Callum had found, were deeply unsettled by people they couldn't read, because their entire operation depended on knowing exactly how much they could take from a person before that person became a problem. Galt left. Not quickly. He was too proud for quickly, but he left. Nora was very still beside Callum. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "That was a mistake," she said. "When he comes back—" "He won't be coming back," Callum said. She turned to look at him. "You don't know that." "I do," he said. And the way he said it, not as reassurance, not as comfort, but as simple, unqualified fact, made her go quiet in a different way than she had gone quiet before. Not the quiet of fear, the quiet of someone encountering something they don't yet have a category for. "Tomorrow," Callum said. "I'll explain everything tomorrow, all of it. I promise you that." He walked out of the building into the cold afternoon air and called Breck before he reached the corner. "Move up the timeline," he said. "I need the full evidence package ready tonight. Everything on Galt, the embezzlement, the HR violations, all of it documented and sourced." He paused. "And Breck, make sure what I did for Iris Bale is completely untraceable back to me. When Nora finds out her sister is safe, I want her to hear it as good news, not as leverage." There was a brief pause on the other end. Breck, who had worked for Callum for 11 years and had seen him operate in every conceivable situation, said something he had never said before in 11 years of service. "You like her," Breck said. Callum ended the call without responding, which, he was aware, was itself a response. The morning Callum walked into Aldgate House without the worn jacket was the morning everything changed. No disguise, no fake name, no forgettable face assembled for the occasion. He came in a charcoal suit that fit the way expensive things fit when they are made specifically for the person wearing them, his two most trusted men flanking him at a distance that was close enough to mean something and far enough to be discreet. The lobby registered his arrival the way lobbies register the arrival of people who carry genuine authority. A subtle, atmospheric shift, a straightening of spines, a collective recalibration of the room's attention. Nora looked up from her desk and went completely still. She recognized him. Not his name, not yet, but she recognized the change. The worn jacket was gone. The waiting for a meeting pretense was gone. The careful, unassuming quality he had worn like a second skin for 10 days had been set aside. And what it revealed underneath was something that recontextualized every conversation they had ever had in a single moment. He walked to her desk. He stood before her the way he stood before people when he was done with indirection. "My name is Callum Wren," he said quietly. "I own this building." The silence that followed was the longest 10 seconds Nora Bale had ever lived through. He watched her process it, the careful, systematic way her mind worked through the implications, reordering everything she thought she understood about the past 10 days into a new configuration. Her face gave very little away. He had come to understand that about her. She didn't perform her emotions. She metabolized them privately and presented you with the conclusion. "You've known," she said finally. "Everything. Not everything immediately. I came here about financial irregularities. What I found was different." "How much do you know?" "About Galt. About what he's been doing to you. About your sister." He held her gaze. "About what he used to keep you silent." Her right hand pressed flat against the desk. "Then you understand why I couldn't—" "Iris is safe," Callum said. Nora's breath stopped. "The people who had leverage over her, they're gone. Completely and permanently. Whatever Galt threatened you with regarding your sister no longer exists. She's safe, she's free, and nothing from those 6 months can touch her going forward." He paused. "That happened 3 days ago." Nora stared at him. The professional composure she had maintained through 10 days of careful conversation and months of systematic abuse cracked open quietly, the way old wood cracks. Not dramatically, but all the way through. Her eyes filled. She blinked hard, once, and looked at her desk. And when she looked back up, she had pulled herself to a steadiness that cost her visibly. "Why?" she said. Her voice was barely sound. "Because someone should have done it sooner," Callum said. "And I was in a position to do it. So I did." He pulled a chair from the waiting area, the same chair he had sat in during their quiet morning conversations, and sat down. He placed a folder on the desk between them. "This is everything we have on Galt. Financial records showing 3 years of embezzlement from building operations. Security footage documenting every incident involving you. HR records confirming no reports were ever filed, despite mandatory reporting policies." He kept his voice level and factual, because she didn't need emotion from him right now. She needed information she could use. "It's enough. More than enough. The question is what you want to do with it." Nora looked at the folder without touching it. "He'll say I'm lying." "He can say whatever he wants from a federal holding cell," Callum said. "The embezzlement alone carries serious charges. What he did to you compounds it significantly. His credibility won't survive contact with this evidence. There'll be an investigation. I'll have to testify." "Yes. That's—" She stopped, started again. "That's not nothing." Saying it out loud, in a room, in front of people. "No," Callum agreed. "It isn't nothing. It's one of the hardest things you'll do. I won't tell you otherwise." He held her gaze. "But I will tell you that you won't do it alone. You'll have legal representation, fully funded, the best I can provide. You'll have documented evidence supporting every word you say. And you'll have the knowledge that every other woman Galt has done this to before you. And there were others, Nora. Finally gets the same accounting you're going to give them." Nora was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the lobby continued its mourning around them. The coffee queue, the revolving door, the ordinary machinery of a working day turning over indifferently. She sat in the middle of it and made the kind of decision that cannot be unmade. "Okay," she said, quietly, completely. "Okay." Ferris Galt arrived at Aldgate House at his usual time that morning and rode the elevator to the 5th floor and walked down the administrative corridor toward his office with the habitual swagger of a man who had never once faced a morning that didn't belong to him. His office door was open. 3 people were inside. 2 of them were federal investigators. The third was a representative from the State Labor Board. On his desk sat a folder he didn't recognize. His computer was already open, already accessed, already giving up everything it contained to people with the authority to take it. He was arrested in the corridor before he reached the door. Quietly, efficiently, without the drama he might have expected, and without the audience he most feared. His hands were cuffed, and he was walked to the elevator, and the building continued around it without stopping. Because buildings, unlike the men who abuse their authority inside them, don't pause for consequence. Nora testified 6 weeks later. She sat in a room with a recorder and 2 investigators, and Callum's lawyer beside her. And she said everything out loud in plain, clear language, without flinching and without breaking. She told them about the leverage. She told them about the office summonings. She told them about the broken arm and the months before it, and the silence she had maintained, because the alternative had seemed unsurvivable. When it was over, she sat in the corridor outside the room for a long time without speaking. Callum was there. He didn't fill the silence. He had learned that about her. She didn't need it filled. She needed it held. "It's done," she said eventually. "It's done," he confirmed. She nodded slowly, looking at the middle distance. "I keep waiting to feel relieved." "That comes later," Callum said. "First comes tired." She almost smiled. "Is that from experience?" "Considerable experience." Galt was convicted on 11 counts, including embezzlement, coercion, and assault. The sentencing was covered briefly in the local business press as a footnote to a larger story about labor violations in commercial property management. His name was reduced within a single news cycle to a cautionary example, which was, Callum reflected, exactly the proportion of legacy the man deserved. 3 months after the arrest, Callum sat across from Nora in a small conference room on the 5th floor of Aldgate House, Galt's old floor, now reorganized entirely under new management, and slid a document across the table. She looked at it carefully, read it twice, looked up. "Building operations manager," she said. "The position needs someone who understands what this building has been and what it needs to become," Callum said. "Someone who will run it with the kind of attention to the people inside it that it has never had. Someone who knows from direct experience what it costs when management fails the people it's supposed to protect." "I don't have a degree yet." "The position includes full tuition coverage and schedule accommodation until you do." Nora looked at the document again. He could see her working through it. The same methodical honesty she brought to everything, checking it against her own instincts, refusing to let the size of the offer override her judgment. "This isn't charity," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a condition. "It's not charity," Callum said. "It's the most qualified candidate I've encountered for a position that genuinely matters. Those two things happen to overlap. That's not charity. That's just accurate." She looked at him for a long moment, with the dark, steady eyes that had first stopped him cold across a lobby 10 weeks ago. The exhaustion that had lived in them then was still there. That kind of tiredness doesn't resolve in 10 weeks. But underneath it, something else had surfaced. Something that had always been there, he suspected, waiting for the weight on top of it to be lifted. She picked up the pen. She signed. Callum walked out of Aldgate House that afternoon, into a city that looked the same as it always had. Indifferent, blazing, entirely unaware of the small, significant things happening inside it. He stopped on the pavement and stood for a moment the way he had stood outside this building 10 weeks ago, looking back at its glass facade. He had come here about missing money, numbers that didn't add up, a small financial irritation that didn't warrant his personal attention, and that he had come to resolve himself for reasons he hadn't fully examined at the time. What he had found instead was a young woman hiding a broken arm under a reception desk and smiling like everything was perfectly fine. She wasn't performing bravery. She was surviving. And Callum Wren, who had built 39 years of a life on the principle that power exists to protect the person holding it, had learned something in the lobby of a building he almost never visited, from a woman who had no idea who he was. That the most important thing power can do has nothing to do with the person holding it. He walked to his car. His phone buzzed. Breck, with the afternoon's business. The empire continued. The machinery turned. The city moved around him the way it always had. But something had shifted. Quietly, permanently, in the way that only the most significant shifts ever happen. And it had started with a broken arm and a smile that broke his heart before he even knew her name. If this so you never miss a story like this one. Share it with someone who needs to hear that the people who seem invisible are often the ones carrying the most.